Hi there, I'm Jason Ross. This is March 16th, 2022, and this is the fourth in a series of classes as an introduction to Lyndon LaRouche. Our teachers tonight are Richard Black and Leni Rubinstein, and they're going to be talking about the aesthetical education of man. I'm going to say just a short thing to situate ourselves both in the class series and in the world, where as we speak, the military operations that Russia is conducting in Ukraine continue to be a potential that could lead into World War III, depending on how NATO, depending on how the United States respond to these. There are calls for closing the skies above Ukraine, calls for a no-fly zone. The only way to implement a no-fly zone in Ukraine would be for American or other NATO jets to shoot down Russian Air Force planes. If that happens, you have a war between the US or NATO and Russia immediately. That's what it would be. It's an act of war. So the danger here of things spiraling out of control is immense. We have put forward a proposal to look at this in the broader strategic context of putting in place a new security and development architecture in the planet, recognizing the security concerns that Russia has expressed repeatedly for years, and also the need to banish the zero growth green ideology from the planet, along with free market economic views, neoliberal economics, and put forward plans for eliminating poverty all across the planet. And the way that that is done is through the uniquely human ability to discover new scientific principles, which enable new technologies, which transform the potential living standards of all people on the planet, and the very connected issue about the cultural discoveries that allow us better to cooperate together through improving our social knowledge, our cultural capital, so to speak. So with that, I will turn it over to our presenters, Richard Black and Leni Rubinstein, for the aesthetic education of mankind. And I will say that if you have questions during the presentation, if you're here on Zoom, just raise your hand. We will have a Q&A period after the presentations. If you're watching on YouTube, you can type your questions in the chat. If you're watching later, add a comment. We'll pose these to our speakers. And if you want an email, you can email questions@laroucheorganization.com. So take it away, friends.
Thank you, Jason. Let's begin by looking at the culture which young people have been given today. That culture is ugly, it's painful, and it's destructive of the most beautiful power of great art. What do we have looking around us? Massive drug addiction, poverty in massive increase, suicide rates expanding, emotional brutality. Life expectancy this year, in the US at least, has gone down. So you can expect that you will live a shorter life than your parents had. So in sum, you're being robbed of a great, great heritage, which is the power and beauty of great music, great painting, great art, which we're going to be looking at some this evening. Look at the music people listen to today, the books they're given to read, what they watch on TikTok and Reddit. Let's take an example of drama. We could take music, the horrible art hanging in the museums. Let's look at popular drama today. The Hunger Games, Squid Game, and Euphoria. The trilogy of the Hunger Games, now this goes back about 10 years, has sold 65 million copies in 50 countries. The Squid Game is the most popular drama worldwide. 165 million households watch it in 95 countries. And Euphoria, which is a rage today, is the second biggest watched HBO product. You know the content of the dramas. In the Hunger Games, young people fight each other to the death in order to get some sustenance, some life-saving aids to save the impoverished people in their neighborhoods. This is all within the context of a fascist police state. In Squid Game, you have bankrupted individuals, some young, some old. They also fight each other to the death in order to what? To get money. To do what? To get out of bankruptcy. Euphoria is contemporary. So you have a group of high school students, drug addicts, drug sellers, involved in violent rages, brutal fights, pedophilia, public revenge sex. This is the drama that people watch. So, I mean, you might ask, what is going on here? What is driving the mass media, the corporate entities to peddle this stuff? And perhaps more importantly, why are you watching it? Why are you spending your money? Why are you spending your time basically in this torture? Netflix, of course, and HBO and Scholastic Publications, which is the biggest children's book producers, that's the publisher of The Hunger Games, are making billions peddling this internationally. So what is this aesthetic? It's about avoiding pain or reducing pain or inflicting pain or taking an anesthetic, a drug, to numb the pain. And somehow this is connected to pleasure. And this passes as great drama. The actors in these dramas win the highest awards. The Hunger Games is a New York Times bestseller. So the establishment has given it their stamp of approval. The actors, the dramas, awards. This is serious culture. This is not pop singing. This is what people go to for drama. LaRouche said that the origins of this cult of ugliness goes back 200 years in the modern period to the period of a German philosopher, famous professor, Immanuel Kant. LaRouche, in fact, said that Kant's approach is Nazi-like. So we're going to take a look at that. For Kant, what art does is it gives you pleasure or the pleasant or generates interest. And that is the domain in which it exists. You go to it in order to increase your pleasure. There are no scientific principles, no classical principles, no reason to it, no reproducible qualities to it. So let's have the first quote. Now, you may be calling me a hypocrite because reading Kant is somewhat torturous, but I want you to see a little bit of the original to see what we're talking about. In this quote, he talks about the art object and the subject. The subject is you and I watching the drama. So, Isa, if you can help us with this quote.
For I must immediately feel pleasure in the representation of the object of art, and of that I can be persuaded by no grounds of proof whatever. Although, as Hume says, all critics can reason more plausibly than cooks, yet the same fate awaits them. They cannot expect the determining ground of their judgment to be derived from the force of the proofs, but only from the reflection of the subject upon its own proper state of pleasure and pain, all precepts and rules being rejected.
So no principles, no precepts are involved in art, and it's about a one-to-one relationship between the viewer, the subject, having this experience. And the metric is pleasure, pain. There are no principles, and it's not intelligible. How the great dramatist, the great painter does what he does is not subject to understanding any kind of proof. Let's have the second quote.
From this alone, it is plain that the beautiful, the judging of which has at its basis a merely formal purposiveness, that is, a purposiveness without purpose, is quite independent of the concept of the good, because the latter presupposes an objective purposiveness, that is, the reference of the art object to a definite purpose.
Congratulations, Isa, getting through that. I'm told that the German is as bad as the English translation, but you get the point. The beautiful in art has no connection to the concept of the good. This is evil. This is satanic. Now, for lack of time, we won't go into it in great detail, and I want to hand things over to Leni. But for Kant, the good does not exist. What exists is each individual in society having a series of negative impulses, lust, theft, murder, stealing. We all have it, you know. These are called negations in Kant's world. And therefore, what society has to do is negate each of our negations. And if we can have an institution which negates the negations, that's a good society. The good as a principle of the universe as a whole does not exist. So this is in fact quite evil. Think of the Hunger Games. That's what we're looking at. This extends into the more modern period in the late 1800s with the London-based figure Oscar Wilde, who you may know made famous the idea of art for art's sake. No purpose, no noble mission, no scientific principles. It's all about your pleasure. And if it's pain that gives you pleasure, well, that's your pleasure or your pain. That's the domain that we're working in. The science of art doesn't exist. And in fact, the generation after Kant, in the circles of Hegel, you have a complete split in areas of investigation between Geisteswissenschaft and Naturwissenschaft. Geistes meaning the spirit, Natur, the physical universe, nature. And as probably anybody who was in school remembers, you're told that the world of the spirit, art, painting, poetry, has certain characteristics. And then there's the other world of the physical universe, astronomy, physics, hard things. And you're either one or the other. Either it's your right brain or your left brain. And you have to choose which universe you live in. And there's no single universe. It's not a universe. This is a living hell. It's a complete lie. And generally, we're indoctrinated into this crap very early on. So for Kant, the only thing that exists is negativity. This is a nightmare, similar to the Hunger Games. So was Kant merely wrong? Or as LaRouche said, is this Nazi-like? Now, Kant writes his 300-page tome, The Critique of Aesthetical Judgment. That's what I'm describing here. That's where we took the quotes earlier. It's published in 1790. Well, this is exactly the moment when in America, Alexander Hamilton is writing the blueprint for the most miraculous prosperity over the next 100 years in the New World that the world had ever seen. A revolution in political freedom is taking place while Kant is writing. In Europe, by 1790, Mozart had just finished 10 extraordinary string quartets, which he composed with his collaborator, Joseph Haydn. And together, they developed a completely new method of compositional method, which we could do an entire class on that, in which the beauty and the intricacy and the intelligibility of the human mind and the heart is opened up for all to see. So what was Kant doing when these things were going on? This is clearly quite an evil operation. That's the culture that we're swimming in today. So again, you've been robbed. You've been robbed of access to great beauty. You've been robbed of Mozart. And instead, even if you don't know the name, force-fed Kant. So I think we'll allow Leni to take us down a different path, and we'll proceed from there.
A much nicer path. So there is a reason why the Schiller Institute got its name from Schiller. And he's known as the poet of freedom in a very different way of thinking about freedom that most people think about today in today's culture. And I would really urge everyone listening in to make Schiller a friend of yours, a friend for life. That's what Helga LaRouche told me when I was 28 years old. And I'm very thankful for that, because he gives you, make him so much a friend of you that when you face certain things, you think about, okay, what would Schiller say? What would Schiller think about that? And so I would urge you to make him your friend. And I just got a thought when Richard talked. Schiller called Kant the Draco, a Draco of his time. And so who was Draco? I will not go into it in detail, but if you read Schiller's, one of his writings on universal history, he writes about Lycurgus and Solon, or Solon and Lycurgus. And before Solon, there was Draco in Greece. And Draco, that's where the word draconian comes from. So Draco made a perfect society. There was no money. People were not allowed to make their own food. They had to eat together. They all had to eat the same thing. The children was taken away and be taken care of. There was no allowance for foreign trade. There was no money. And if you want to have get together with your wife, you had to find her and rape her, and on and on. So everything functioned perfectly, except everything that was human was taken away from the people in that society. Mm-hmm. So first Schiller praises this. This is great. It functions like clockwork. But the most important thing, namely the individual human being in the society, their humanity was taken away. So Schiller calls on Grace and Dignity, he calls Kant the Draco of the time. So it gives you a little sense how Schiller thought about Kant. Schiller was, you think about Schiller as a poet, as a philosopher and so forth, he was very political in a very unique way. Everything he did, he wrote dramas, poetry, essays on universal history, essays on philosophy, and everything was aimed at how to make the future a better society for mankind. Like his dramas. Now, Richard mentioned the dramas that are now popular today. When Schiller wrote his first drama, it was immediately banned. And then he wrote a second drama, which was also going on at his time, first The Robbers, and then Cabal and Love. And then he realized he had to flee, and he had to put his dramas in another time, history time, but still teach people certain lessons, exactly what Shakespeare had to do. And Schiller said, when people go into the theater to see one of my dramas, I have to make the dramas in such a way that people come out being better people than they were when they came in, learning about their own follies, learning where tragedy unfolds because of lack of actions of people. And a little side to Schiller's drama is that in every single one of Schiller's dramas, it is women that are the heroes. And I guess it's because he wanted to organize half of the population to be political giants too. So, but what he does, he's the top of everything Schiller writes, and he says himself it's the best that he ever wrote, and it's irrefutable, is the education of man, the aesthetical education of man in a series of letters. And time does not allow to go into this in detail, but it was a complete refutation of Kant and Kant's system. So you kind of get a sense from what Richard said of the political fight at the time regarding ideas and the ideas about man and man's relationship to the universe and to his society, what it was for a fight of the minds that Schiller was waging. So when Schiller and many other thinkers at his time, they were very excited about what was happening in America. They followed it. And there are many things to talk about it, but Schiller, for example, had a painting of Bunker's Hill on top of his desk where he was working. And when the French Revolution started, everybody, all thinkers, or many thinkers thought, including Schiller, wow, we are going to replicate what they did in America. We are going to have republics like in the United States. And then when it ended in horror with the guillotine and the Jacobin terror, then Schiller had to rethink what needs to be done. And so he says it, and he decided, and he made a number of preparations with other writings that are all developing the ideas that then are crystallized in the aesthetic education of man. But he is asked, it's letters back and forth to a Danish prince, and he's asked by the Danish prince to give him help regarding how to solve the political affairs. And Schiller says, it will be a great honor for me to do so, but I need to say, we can't say anything. I mean, is it a great work of art to create political freedom? So shouldn't I do what you're telling me to do? And Schiller says, well, but it doesn't function like that. He says, the only way we can get a change in the political affairs of man is through ennoblement of the individual character. Otherwise, we are not going to have a change. And he is then developing in the letters how to go about that. So Kant is negating the sensuous side of man. And Schiller says, no, we have to develop the emotions of the individual so that you learn to sense more noble, that your emotions gets developed, because we are harmonious whole. He actually says in other writings that if you try to suppress your senses, it's something very ugly that are underneath there if you just kind of push it aside and it doesn't exist. So he says, in order to solve the political problem in practice, one must follow the path through the aesthetic, because it is through the beautiful that one proceeds to freedom. In letter 8, he says letter 8 and letter 9 is kind of very beautiful language. It's like almost like it's poetic. And he talks about, if you're a young person, what to do. And in letter 8, he says, well, you have to dare to be wise. And in the 9th letter, he goes on saying, live with your century, but don't be a creation of it. Give the society the direction towards the good, and the slow rhythm of time will get it there. So as Richard said, Kant says there's no standard, no intelligible standard for truth and beauty. And there's no intelligible principle of creative discovery. So that is what make man man. So Kant basically says you have to negate everything that is human in you, or that is the fountain which will come to of passion for good that you cannot have if you follow Kant. So Schiller wants to have a harmonious whole, as I said before, and he says you educate your emotions through classical art. And therefore, I hope that people took, at least some people took Jason's challenge from the First Class series that you have, where he said, listen to classical music every day for a month. Or I will put a bigger challenge, listen to the 172 CDs of Bach, Johann Sebastian Bach. Just listen to the whole thing, and the way you think will change.
Well, and Kant would say, if you said that to Kant, he would say, I can't.
And Schiller also goes through very much directly in several occasions, therefore, the responsibility of the artist, that he says the artist must be almost an ideal man, because it is his responsibility whether the dignity of the human being is destroyed or is lifted up. And that also coheres with what Richard said. If you see the so-called artists today, they're destroying the humanity in the individual. They are not artists. So Schiller calls upon every single one of us to strive towards, through our entire life, to become a beautiful soul. You can never completely be perfect, be a total beautiful soul, but you can strive your entire life to get towards that goal, and your heart will become bigger and bigger, and your passions will aid in the effort, especially through classical art. The same idea Plato had with the golden soul, to strive towards to become a golden soul. And the Chinese philosopher Confucius, that lived a couple of hundred years before Plato, had the same idea. These two was not so developed, but I'm just taking this up because it is an idea that great thinkers have had before Schiller, that Schiller then built upon, where Confucius says that you have to develop yourself so much that you can follow what your heart desires without digressing what is right. And also he says that of everything, love is the most important. If you don't have love, everything else do not count. So now I would like Schiller to repeat again. He asked every one of us to strive to become a beautiful soul. And he writes many beautiful philosophical writings that you can dive in and begin to discover what he's saying. I would like to have the slide of Schiller on the beautiful soul. Isa?
We call a soul beautiful when its moral sense of all human experience has become so steadfast that it can confidently let its emotions serve to guide its own will without any risk of coming into contradiction with its own decisions. The individual actions of the beautiful soul are therefore not moral in themselves, but rather are so by virtue of its entire nature. The beautiful soul possesses no other merit than its own existence. It performs humanity's most odious duties with the ease of someone acting out of pure drive, and the most heroic sacrifices it extracts from its natural drive, which appear to the observer as the mere free play of that drive. Hence, the beautiful soul is never cognizant of the beauty of its own acts. It no longer occurs to it that one could act and feel otherwise.
That drive, that passion, is a passion in form of agape, of love on a higher level. And for Schiller, love, freedom, the beautiful, and reason are all concepts in the same realm. And love, agape, is the emotion of the beautiful soul, the emotion that moves creativity. And I would like now to have the quote on love, but in Schiller's, it is agape.
The only
Lisa?
free sentiment is that of love, for its pure stream flows from the fountainhead of freedom, from our divine nature. This is not the small and lowly man who measures himself against what is great and lofty, nor is it the mind giddily gazing up at reason's law. It is absolute greatness itself, which recreates itself in grace and beauty and is consummated in morality. It is the lawgiver himself, the God within us, which sports with its own image in the sensuous world. The soul, forever obliged to give homage to love, thus becomes dissolved into love. For here, there is nothing to set limits, since there is nothing above absolute greatness. And since grace and beauty are where sensuousness, the only potential source of limits, comes into harmony with the mind's ideas.
So man is the living image of the creator, and classical art gives you access to that likeness. Just think about it. Like this, what is divine in you give you access, classical art gives you access to that, because the subject of classical art is the creative process as such. And it's the same idea that, and let me also say, got to think about Richard, namely science applies that creative process in the discovery of physical principles. That's why when you had a division between Geisteswissenschaft and Naturwissenschaft, that was very damaging, because the two goes together as a loving couple, so to speak. And that likeness of the creator, Cusa also has, and Nicholas Cusanus also has the same idea of man's mind. When you strive to become more and more of a beautiful soul, then the lawful ordering of your mind is the microcosm of the lawful ordering of the universe. And again, that has all to do with classical art and why this is so important to dive into. So classical art evokes this passion of agape, love of yourself in a good way, love of the creator, love of your neighbor, love of the world, love of beauty, love of truth. And also that begin, the more you exercise it, becomes the way you approach life. You handle problems, you solve problems, you get ideas to how to guide your life, that this becomes your guidepost. And I want to give an example. I think most of you know that Beethoven wrote a 9th symphony in 4 movements, where the 3 first movements creates the basis for the 4th triumphant movement, where Beethoven uses a poem from Schiller that he had worked up. He had tried to figure out how could he use this poem for, I think it was 24 years, something like that. And there Schiller writes, Freude schöner Götterfunken, joy, beautiful godly sparks. And the beautiful godly sparks is a creativity of man, that which is the divine part of you, and which is what, this is such a triumph, because here Beethoven created this masterpiece of a celebration of man, and we are all brothers. And what makes us that is our creativity and love of truth and beauty, that we can strive towards becoming beautiful soul, and therefore give the best future for mankind possible. So I would like now to begin to get into looking at some pieces of art. I'm not going to discuss it that much, but let's first take a quote from LaRouche.
All classical art is premised upon the idea, all classical art is premised upon the unfolding of an idea. All classical art is premised upon the sense of beauty, which the innermost cognitive processes of the individual mind experience from those works of art whose content is change.
So can we have, so whose content is change? And and the unfolding of an idea, I wanted people to kind of have that in their mind, because now we are going to take a poem that some of you might know and some of you might not. It is by Shelley. He wrote it in 1817, Ozymandias. And so let's read Ozymandias.
Ozymandias.
And think about this unfolding an idea and change, and how Shelley does it.
Ozymandias by Percy Shelley. I met a traveler from an antique land who said, 2 vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand, half sunk a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculpture, well those passions read which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal, these words appear. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away.
So you look at it, you have I that meets the traveler, and then the sculptor speaks because he speaks. Can we keep the poem up, please? And then the traveler, the sculptor speaks through what he has done in depicting Ozymandias with his frown and his wrinkled lip and that he is a nasty guy. And then you have the poet, and then it kind of is turned upside down with "Look at me, my King of Kings," because this was an attack from Shelley at the time of the mighty. The poet endures. So it is a sweet, ironic poem by Shelley. We have to go on, but you can look at it later again, and Shelley as a whole, and Keats. Let's go on. You can remove it. You can remove it. Yeah. So now it is clear that it takes a little while before you begin to, because some people might be completely not used to listen to classical music. Some of the classical music you listen to might be terrible, but it's called classical. You might not be used to look at paintings or architecture, reading poetry, but you can begin, if you work on getting rid of awful stuff in yourself, ugly stuff in yourself, and get it out of your world. And then just think about, what does it enkindle in me? And when I listen to a piece of music, or if I see a painting, read a poem, what does it do to my mind and to my emotions? Does it create agape? Is that coming up? Or lust? What is the view of man portrayed in the piece of art? And because you can only use yourself as a judge, I have found that there's no other way. You have to use your own mind and your own emotions to judge whether this is good or not. And then, of course, there's a lot of things that has been determined also because of what Richard brought up as classical. I mean, Helga LaRouche made a point the other day that Rolling Stones are considered classical. So I would show you now, so you can get a sense that even things that are called classical can, and I will try not to say too much so people can kind of just try to look at it themselves. I have a number of paintings now by two classical painters that lived approximately at the same time, at approximately the same area in Europe. And that is Rubens and Rembrandt. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take a couple of ideas that was from the Bible, that both Rubens and Rembrandt painted the same idea. And then you look at it, and we might go back and forth a couple of times. You can kind of get the difference, and then we proceed. So the first is Bathsheba, Rubens' Bathsheba. Can we have that? In a big screen. I would like to have the big screen up. Yeah. So Bathsheba, from the Bible, King David wanted to have sex with Bathsheba, so he sent her husband to the front so that he would be away, so he could have sex with her. And in this painting, it's not easy to say, but up there to the left, King David is standing there looking down while Bathsheba is being prepared. And I would like now to get a close-up of Bathsheba's face. So just look at this face, kind of whatever impression it gives you. And then I would like to have a close-up of the woman preparing Bathsheba. What kind of impression that gives you. And then I would like to go to Rembrandt with the exact same idea. There is Bathsheba being made ready for King David. And can we now have the face of Bathsheba? So you think about the Rubens Bathsheba and Rembrandt's Bathsheba. Could we actually go up and get Rubens Bathsheba? Yeah. No, the little one, just Bathsheba's face. Yeah. And then go down and have Rembrandt's Bathsheba's face. Yeah.
Wow, that's something.
And then I would like to have Rembrandt's woman that prepare Bathsheba. And I would like to have the woman that prepares Rubens Bathsheba. And I will not say anything more. It's just what impression you get of the two painters. So I would like to go on now to the next one, which is the prodigal son. This is Rubens' prodigal son. It is like, it's in a barn. You can see the horses there to the left. It looks pretty kind of agitated. The horses look agitated. Even the pigs look agitated. The only thing that looks a little calm is the cow lying down there. And then you have all the way to the right, you have the prodigal son and a woman feeding the pigs. Let's take a couple of closer shots. Here's the horses. Can you see how they are agitated in their bodies with their muscles and everything? See, as a painter, you had to think about how to do that. It takes a lot of skill to paint horses like that. Can we have the other? And there you have the scene with the prodigal son and next to the pigs. And let me have, it's the same idea from the Bible. Now we have the prodigal son of Rembrandt. Look at the whole thing. The center, of course, is the father greeting his son. And then you can see the son has gone through some trouble. You can see his feet, the shoe is off one foot, and he's kneeling down on his knees in front of his father. Now let's have a close up of the son and the father. So what does that ignite in your mind for the view of man that Rembrandt is portraying here, and forgiveness and love? To think about how Rubens did it with the agitated horses and the pigs and so forth. So now I would like to kind of up the ante a little bit. This one is by Rubens called The Drunken Silenus. And I would like to have a close-up shot of Silenus and the woman up there. See the same kind of woman face. Rubens like these kind of woman faces there to the right. And you can see what this black man does to this fat white man. And then the other shot. This is a woman who is nursing her children while she's touching their genitals. And what is the view of man and the view of a woman that this portrays? Then I would like to go to Rembrandt again. This is an old woman reading. Where's the light coming from? I would like to show you another painting by Rembrandt. I saw that in Los Angeles at Getty's Museum, and I was completely, I couldn't, what is going on here, until I read the little brochure I gotten at the entrance. Let's get the close-up shot. Look at his hand and look at the face. What does that evoke in you? And this is San Bartolomeo, who was skinned alive. And if you look at his hand, Rembrandt has tried to paint him skinned. So Rubens and Rembrandt were very famous. Rubens were hanging in churches all over Europe, and big, huge paintings from floor to ceiling, but all with that eros, this kind of lust, and a view of man that is not a divine view, that is not the view of man in the living image of the creator, but more man as a beast. But he's classical. So you have to, wherever you go, for example, paintings, it's all art forms, you have to use your own judgment regarding what it creates in you, because you want to go for something that evokes agape, that evokes something good in you, because that is the source for creative discovery and creativity. And that is what will give you strength to handle life in the best possible way, whatever life brings you. I would like to take a little, Rich and I talked about getting things from all over the world, but how to do that with the time and also for people's understanding. So I would like to just give you a couple of Chinese paintings. And I do realize that it's difficult for people if they don't have any background for Chinese paintings, but they're very, very special, because like in the West, where a poet will write a poem and then Schumann or Schubert and others, Brahms, will put it to music and make it a higher unity of an idea. The Chinese do the same thing with paintings, and they call paintings soundless poems. And so when I saw this painting first, I couldn't understand. Can we get a close-up? So see, you saw the whole painting where the guy was kind of like framed with the snow on the bamboos, and he's like in the middle. And unfortunately, it's not so clear, but if you see it in reality, his eyes is looking at you. And this is from the Tang Dynasty, which is 618 and 300 years more. And it's like he's looking at you from there far away. He's right there. He's alive. And so I asked a friend, and he came and looked at the painting, and then he stood in front of me and recited a poem because he knew that it was a poem. I just learned the other day that actually several painters from different dynasties, for example, from the Song Dynasty, have also painted paintings depicting this poem. So let's go and look at the poem.
River snow. 1,000 mountains, no birds fly. 10,000 footpaths, no trace of footprints. Solitary boat, an old man in straw coat and hat. Childless, fishing in the cold river snow.
Okay, let's get the next one. Before you start the audio, there's much more to say about Chinese poetry. I just want to give you a sniff of how many incredible things there is to discover. So let's hear the poem in Chinese while you look at the man.
柳宗元江雪，千山鸟飞绝，万径人踪灭。 孤舟蓑笠翁，独钓寒江雪。
So let's take the next one, which is from the Song Dynasty. It's a painter called Leni, and the Song Dynasty was from like a little bit after the Tang Dynasty ended. It started in 1960. It went for 300 years. And both period, I mean, the Tang Dynasty they have such beautiful poems. The Chinese
960, yeah.
960, yeah. The Tang Dynasty, they have incredible poetry, but you need to know the language to really enjoy it. But here's it is with Chinese painting. So you can have a painting, and I've had several occasions where it gripped me, and I'll get a Chinese and they would recite a poem. The Fisherman was not the only time. And I knew if something gripped me, there must be something else. And it was always a poem. So, but they also have another thing, and that is that calligraphy in Chinese, because the way the Chinese character functions as an art form in itself, they combine the painting and the poem on the painting, so it goes up in a higher unit. It is not very clear for people, I know. There is some birds flying in the left-hand corner. It's an evening scene. And you see half of the painting is these two lines of Chinese characters, which is two lines from a poem. And the poem is also from the Tang Dynasty. So it's a guy the painter is from the Song Dynasty, which was later, and he took a couple of lines from the Tang Dynasty, which was earlier. So let's see the close-ups. So this is the way you hold the brush when you write Chinese is the same way as you do hold the brush when you paint. And there is a beauty when you begin to dive into a little bit more. There is a beauty. There was one exhibition I went to where it was like I was at a concert. And I was there for a couple of hours and I couldn't believe it. And what it did to me. That means there is some universal ideas, since it could speak to me, although a lot of it I didn't understand. So anyway, that's the poem. That's half of the painting. And then the other half of the painting, you can see the birds down there in the left-hand corner. And let me tell you what let's look at the whole painting, but let me tell you first what the calligraphy says before we play it. It says, mountains hold the autumn colors near. Swallows cross the evening sun slowly. Let's hear the audio.
山寒秋色尽，鸟渡夕阳迟。
So just to give you a little different flavor. So can we have the next slide, please?
This principle of valid creativity, of composition and performance is the same for all art forms: music, poetry, drama, painting, and so on. The essence of classical art is the evoking of agape in the composer, the performers, and the audience, through evoking in each a summoning of creative powers of reason to address a problem which cannot be addressed successfully in any other mode.
So this is an introduction to a song that you're going to hear now by William Warfield, who used to be a very close collaborator of the Schiller Institute. He was actually a board member of the Schiller Institute. This is in October 2000 in Los Angeles, actually in Pasadena. And the song he's singing is Take My Mother Home. Before we get going, I would ask you to again think, what does this evoke in you? Okay.
I think I heard him say when he was struck hill, I think I heard him say, take my mother home. I think I heard him cry when they were spitting in his face. I think I heard him cry, take my mother home. Then I'll die easy, take my mother home. Then I'll die easy, take my mother home. I think I heard him say when they was wrapping off his clothes. I think I heard him say, oh, take my mother home. I think I heard him cry when they was nailing in the nails. I think I heard him cry, oh, take my mother home. I'll die this death on Calvary. Ain't gonna die no more. I'll die on the Calvary. Ain't gonna die no more, brother. Ain't gonna die no more. I'll die easy if you take my mother home. I'll die so easy if you take my mother home. I think I heard him say when he was dying on the cross. I think I heard him say, take my mother home. I think I heard him cry when he was giving up the ghost. I think I heard him cry, please take my
And nobody clapped. So the last slide is a lead into Richard. Please.
Art is the mother of science, the spirit without whose nourishment scientific endeavor would fall lifeless. Art is the means by which men and women gain insight into those principles by which a successfully developing society must be ordered.
Richard is on.
Waiting for the camera to go. So what does LaRouche mean that art is the only mother of science? That it is art that gives birth to real science. Without art, there is no science. LaRouche has written many extended research papers in which he illustrates that the cognitive process that the artist goes through, a composer, a Rembrandt, in producing a work of art which evokes this quality of love, this quality of agape, that cognitive process in the artist and in the audience listening is exactly the same as the cognitive process that a real scientist uses in discovering new unseen principles that govern the natural world. And we're very fortunate, we're very happy that in the modern period, two very extraordinary accomplished scientists, Max Planck and Albert Einstein, give us a report on how they made their discoveries. Not what they discovered, but how they thought about the method of their method of discovery. So if we can have the first slide, number 37, 38, and 39 of Einstein.
Thus, the supreme task of the physicist is the discovery of the most general elementary laws from which the world picture can be deduced logically. But there is no logical way to the discovery of these elementary laws. There is only the way of intuition, which is helped by a feeling for the order lying behind the appearance, and this Einfühlung, intuition, insight, is developed by experience. Can one therefore say that any system of physics might be equally valid and possible? Theoretically, there is nothing illogical in that idea, but the history of scientific development has shown that of all thinkable theoretical structures, a single one has at each stage of advance proved superior to all the others. It is obvious to every experienced researcher that the theoretical system of physics is dependent upon and controlled by the world of sense perception, though there is no logical way whereby we can proceed from sensory perception to the principles that underlie the theoretical structure. Moreover, the conceptual synthesis, which is a transcript of the empirical world, may be reduced to a few fundamental laws on which the whole synthesis is logically built. In every important advance, the physicist finds that the fundamental laws are simplified more and more as experimental research advances. He is astonished to notice how sublime order emerges from what appeared to be chaos. And this cannot be traced back to the workings of his own mind, but is due to a quality that is inherent in the world of perception. Leibniz well expressed this quality by calling it a pre-established harmony. I have heard that Max Planck's colleagues are in the habit of tracing this attitude to his extraordinary personal gifts of energy and discipline. I believe they are wrong. The state of mind which furnishes the driving power here resembles that of the devotee or the lover. The long sustained effort is not inspired by any set plan or purpose. Its inspiration arises from a hunger of the soul.
So Einstein discusses that the role of the physical investigator is to establish a truthful world picture. In a sense, he composes in the mind a world picture. Many of you may know that in 1905, Einstein was 26 years old at the time. He wrote a series of papers, published papers, which revolutionized the way all men and women think about the universe as a whole. Whereas the view beforehand is that there were separate categories, matter, energy, space, and time, and gravitation was the push and pull between a very large object and a very small object. Einstein laid out a completely different world picture, which is that the universe exists as a physical space-time continuum, and that matter and energy are two aspects of a single unity, a single entity, and that gravity is not a relationship between two objects, but is the warping of that space-time continuum. Here's Einstein speaking briefly about this.
It followed from the special theory of relativity that mass and energy are but different manifestations of the same thing, a somewhat unfamiliar conception for the average mind. Furthermore, the equation E is equal mc squared, in which energy is thought equal to mass multiplied with the square of the velocity of light, showed that very small amount of mass may be converted into a very large amount of energy, and vice versa. The mass and energy were in fact equivalent, according to the formula mentioned above. This was demonstrated by Coker and Walton in 1932 experimentally.
So Einstein reports that the work of the scientist is to generate a new hypothesis. That's not a specific proposal, but a new picture of the world as a whole, in which he identifies invisible, unseen principles which were not known heretofore. The drive, the trigger for such an investigation is that there is a problem which is unsolved anywhere. And it's the passion, the agape of what he calls the zealot or the lover, which drives the scientist to find that new insight, that new intuition. He calls a sublime order becomes clear from a scene, an array which looked like nothing but chaos. In this period, Einstein developed the idea that gravitational waves exist, that gravity, far from being a thing among things, can propagate as waves. This was in 1915. And it took 100 years before scientists investigating were able to develop the apparatus to test Einstein's theory. And recently, in 2016, an array of scientists across the globe did experiments which showed that gravitational waves in fact existed, something which Einstein had conceptualized but not seen 100 years earlier. Can we have the next slide? This is a article in the New York Times, February 2016, gravitational waves detected, confirming Einstein's theory This is a picture of a few of the scientists and backers of the project, which took, I believe, a couple of decades of work before they had the evidence that was required. This new picture of the universe. So let's look at Max Planck, who also gives us a report of his discoveries.
It is not true, as has often been stated in physicist circles, that in the exposition of an hypothesis, the explorer must draw the material for his ideas solely and strictly from those original data which have been definitely furnished by the results of research measurements. This would mean that the formative concepts which give shape to an hypothesis must be strictly independent of all theoretical origin. That is not so. For, on the other hand, every hypothesis, as a factor in the picture of the external universe presented by the physicist, is a product of the freely speculating human mind. And, on the other hand, there are no physical formula whatsoever which are the immediate results of research measurements. The opposite is the case. Every measurement first acquires its meaning for physical science through the significance which a theory gives it.
So, as Leni and I were talking, of course, people may know, and I think Bill Ferguson mentioned it last week, Einstein, when he was working on, of course, always the most difficult, the biggest problem about advancing a new portrait, a new picture of the universe, like the rest of us would at a certain point get emotionally blocked, come to a point where he could go no further. And for him, his friend that he called on was Mozart. He would get up from his study, walk into the next room, pick up his violin, and he was an accomplished amateur violinist, and play Mozart. And after playing Mozart, having a conversation with Mozart, he would put the violin down and go back to his study and take the problems again. And what occurred was not that he learned something from the music, but the music allowed his mind, he allowed him to think musically, creatively, and he would go back to the hard task at hand. Planck also, when he was a young man, was a very accomplished amateur pianist. And one pathway when he was in his 20s was possibly to become a professional pianist. And I think some of the elders said, there's no future in that. You better get some practical work. So he became a physicist. And as soon as he began moving up the ladder, qualifying, the top physicists of his day said, well, you got to realize all the fundamental discoveries in science have been made. So you just have to find a little niche for yourself and don't worry about the big ideas. Well, of course, Planck had a different idea. What does he emphasize? He says in the quote that we just looked at, it's not the data, it's not the measurements, it's not the collecting of the observation. It's not like going into the jungle and watching the orangutans and writing down their activity, and you come back and you write a report. This is what I saw. That's not science. Science is the motion of the mind. Science is the motion of the mind from a lower order to a higher order. And surprisingly, Einstein reports that the mind sees a universe more coherent, more harmonic, and more simplified as the insights flow and are proven to be the case. And so it's very much the case. And this is, LaRouche would often say that my specialty, he would say, is creativity. And this is one of the key themes I would urge people to study in LaRouche's writings. And perhaps we can put some of the sources in the chat, etc. That the motion of the mind of the creative artist and the motion of the mind of the scientist are one and the same substance. And perhaps Leni can now introduce again our friend Bill Warfield, and we can see how he, like Planck, like Einstein, speaks to us and gives us a report of the nature of the aesthetical mind.
Yeah, Warfield for sure lived up to what Schiller says about how an artist, the responsibility of an artist, where he described how whether he was working on a lullaby or a German art song or a spiritual, he would use a minimum of 100 hours of working on it. And one point we had a workshop where in Los Angeles where some of the young people asked him, how come you can get us to cry, but you don't cry? And he said, I do so. I sit at my piano and work myself all the way till just before I break down. And then I know how far I can take you when I sing a piece of music. So let's hear from this wonderful, wonderful, beautiful soul, William Warfield, as ending and then we go to question and answers.
And at the beginning, he's referring to Helga Zepp-LaRouche as this wonderful woman.
Actually, two things come to mind which were triggered by the wonderful speech and the question that the lady asked. And from the standpoint of an artist, what do you do where you encounter people who have not been really exposed to beauty as you know it? And how do you show them, or how do you get them to start thinking in those terms? And the one thing that triggered the big thing, which our wonderful lady said, is you have to yourself get all of the ugliness out of your mind first, and then start taking on a thing of beauty and relate to those things that you feel are beautiful, that are contributing to man's soul, not to menial things of any sort. It will govern what you look at on TV. It will govern what you read. It will govern what you decide to participate in. And as a result, you find that beauty starts coming into you. And when beauty starts coming into you and consuming you, then there is no other way for you to react than to spread that to other people. And it's amazing how a youngster can look at you and see something in you that will make him say, what is that I see? It's sort of like people who say, oh, I can see auras. I can see an aura around a person when I see them, they're this, they're that, and so on and so forth. This kind of a thing that I'm talking about is the core to which the artist responds when he is performing for you. I can no more sing to you a Heine poem without knowing or having experience, whether it be Schubert, Schumann, without knowing the poem itself and what Heine has put down on paper or what Goethe has put down on paper. And that is part of art. The technique is perfectly simple. As we've said, I can teach you how to sing. I can teach you how to produce notes. I can teach you how to phrase. I can teach you how to correctly say the words. I can teach you all of these things. But all of those things are merely the tools to express the beauty that is inside you. And when you have that, then you are ready to communicate that to other people. Now, I'm not saying that one should sit themselves up and just don't do anything except that you say considers beautiful, or you've got to also be aware of what ugliness is, because you cannot avoid ugliness unless you kind of recognize the culprit when you see it. And as our wonderful lady has said, the oligarchy has so many ways of confusing you by surrounding things that seem beautiful. When you investigate, you find underneath its ugliness. And that is the big thing with us. We have to examine things. My father used to have said something in his sermon once that has followed me all of my days, and I was quite young at the time. He said the Bible says we should go into the hedges and highways. We should go out and we should bring men in, and we should, if a person is down, we should go down and pick them up and bring them up. And he said, I warn you, if you are going to go into a nightclub and see somebody there that you want to bring out, or you want to deal with a youngster that's doing dope, or you want to deal with any of the ugliness things of life, be sure when you go down there that you have the strength for two to come up. Because you have to come up and bring somebody with you. That's the strength of two. And this is the kind of a thing that I mean when I say we got to recognize evil, know what we're dealing with, and then how to combat it. And to me, it reminds me of a situation in which I was with Pablo Casals, the great cellist and conductor, and we were rehearsing something one afternoon, and it was a Bach cantata. And it was one of those things in which everything happened in the rehearsal. And we finished the piece and we just sat there in silence with a catharsis of having experienced something great that had come amongst us while we were doing it. And I looked up and the maestro had a tear rolling down his cheek. And he said, aren't we fortunate to be musicians? I've never forgotten that moment, because he outlined for us the profession that we were in is a profession of calling and a profession of art and a profession that when you're in, you are closest to God, I believe, when you are performing, because you are a vehicle for that wonderful thing that we're getting from on high that comes through us and makes us a bigger person and makes us the vehicle to transport that to other people. But you have to be, as they say in television, online to get it. And I adjure you, get your act together so that you surround yourself with beauty, so that you surround yourself with an understanding of what evil is and how to combat it. And then when you look at a youngster who is out there on dope, you have something more to bring to him. You have the strength of two rather than yourself alone. Thank you.
So that's the challenge, to get our act together.
So we can now open up for questions.
Wow, thank you both very much. What a feast. So again, for those of us joining here on Zoom, raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question. On YouTube, there's been some conversation. If you want to type in a question there or email it in, questions at LaRoucheOrganization.com, please do so.
And I think we'd like to prioritize questions from young people for whom these ideas are revolutionarily new.
Yes, this is an introduction. So we'll start with Jim Beggs. Go for it.
Okay.
Oh, hi. Yeah, I was wondering if you could talk about some like if we're thinking about getting our act together, in the culture and art that we consume, what's the most effective ways for evaluating that art to determine whether it's something we want in our lives or not? Like, is it most important to critically think about the thematics of it and what it's telling us? Like with Squid Games, it's people just competing with one another, killing one another for money to get out of debt. Like, might this be harmful to us? Or is it more important to like pay attention to the feelings certain art evokes in you?
I think that if you want to, you can get help. And I meant what I said before, that I really thought it was a great challenge that Jason made with the listening to classical music for a month. But some of it is not good. So I don't have it in my head, but I have a wonderful collection of everything Bach produced, which is 172 CDs. And I have listened to them all 2 times. And then some of the single ones more times than that. And if you do that, and you can exercise or whatever when you do it, but don't talk, don't have television going, but just have it so that it begin to be, it's a language that then begins to be in your mind without you knowing it is in your mind. Well, you get to know it's in your mind, but you have to dive into it and really learn it as a language. And when you then have Bach, then Mozart, Beethoven, and so forth, you begin to hear things in them because you're beginning to have a language. So I would really, concerning classical music, I would really start with Bach. And with paintings, you do have to, maybe others have another idea, maybe you have another idea, Richard, but I find with paintings, where I was very fortunate when I grew up, that that is what Warfield said, get everything that you know that is ugly and bad, try to get rid of it, or not try, get rid of it, just away. And then you will be able to judge whether something, when you look at a painting, for example, like you did, I think people understood the difference between Rubens and Rembrandt when we kind of looked at several of them. What is it? What is the viewer man? What is it that it creates in you? I mean, if somebody says to me, that was a wonderful piece of music and I didn't like it, I just trust my own judgment today. I don't say if people are clapping and I don't like it, I don't like to clap. So, so I think you have to, poetry, I mean, for example, what you can do is decide you're going to study Shelley. You're going to read all of Keats. And it's difficult. And then you get together with a friend and you discuss through a poem. It's a wonderful way of spending time with a friend, to read a poem or two and then discuss it. So that's what I would say.
I think it's a very good question. For younger viewers, when you're listening to Bach, make sure to first take your iPhone and put it in the microwave. Because one of the things that's been done in the recent period is that people's attention span has been destroyed, like, for example, TikTok. So it's a very good question, because also, as Leni said, what poses as classical is often ugly. So beginning with, as Leni said, Bach through Mozart, Beethoven, LaRouche once wrote a paper called Beethoven as a Physical Scientist. Is a good place to begin. Good friends of Leni and mine gave us tickets to the very prestigious Lincoln Center in New York. And it was a classical music concert, and it was among the most professional and accomplished technically string players at Lincoln Center. It was a string quartet. So we were excited. Our friends gave us excellent tickets in front row center in the orchestra. So we were quite happy and excited until the music started. And then, and these were pieces that were written over the last 25 years. And so the string quartet began. And then at a certain point, the pianist jumped up from the bench, reached into the piano, and started plucking the strings. And then the first violinist laid out, screamed out a yelp. And this was in the middle of a string quartet. So Leni and I looked at each other and said, well, we've been had. So all that glitters is not gold. So it's a good question.
And it continued through the whole concert.
That's right.
Including, so all the strings of the violins was destroyed when they finished the piece, for example.
I mean, it was sad because these were clearly top flight musicians forced to prostitute themselves in this way. So as Schiller said, art must be beautiful. If it's not beautiful, it's not art.
And the passion that it has to evoke in you is not that of allurement and lust. It has to be a passion for love, which ignites something very special in your mind. And you are happy to be alive for what you can do. It's just it's a sublime state of mind. So, but now also I know for young people, we are starting the aesthetic education of man, the letters next Tuesday in our weekly readings. So if you want to dive deeper into Schiller, which helps a lot also to judge these matters, please join.
Thanks, Jim. And Jim, if you'd like to come back in, feel free. I do have, and anyone else, please raise your hand. I do have something that came in from YouTube otherwise. Okay, I'll go with that. So there was a question, if you could say more about what you were getting at when you said that the law of yourself is the same as the law of the universe. That you had said something to that effect. If you could you say more about that, Sarah?
Yeah,
Sarah
that was very brief. And I had actually forgotten to take it up, and then I jumped in it. Nicholas Cusanus, or Nicholas of Cus, he has many names. And Helga has talked a lot about Cusanus, so has Lyndon LaRouche. I don't have any. I know one article Helga wrote was on the sweetness of truth that is accessible, but LaRouche also has written in many different papers if you want to know more in depth. But what I meant briefly is that Cusa describes that the lawful ordering, the mind is lawfully ordered in the same way as the universe is lawfully ordered. And therefore the mind is like a microcosm of the universe, the macrocosm. And obviously, if you are involved with ugly things, your mind doesn't function like that.
On this question of agape and discovery, I remember LaRouche on many occasions using the following example of a young parent or grandparent watching a toddler playing with blocks. And the toddler is very concentrated on building something. And she somehow built something more intricate and more difficult than she had ever done before. And she is ecstatic. She is elated. And the adult, perhaps watching from far away, begins shedding tears of joy because what the adult just witnessed is a discovery. For the toddler, this was a discovery. I was thinking about this the other day. Why is it that I can remember the day I learned to tie my shoelaces?
I can too.
Yeah, it is really so. Obviously, I don't know whether I was 4 or 6 or whatever I was, but it was a while ago. And I didn't remember anything else in that year. That year, I remembered I tied my shoes. So there is something about the act of discovery, the cognitive, the spiritual act of discovery. That's what drives a scientist, and that's what drives an artist. And the artists are involved in discoveries. Mozart and Haydn worked together and made discoveries in compositional methods to communicate more powerfully what had not been communicated before in that way. So this idea of you can think in yourself about discoveries you've made and the emotion connected to that. And that is akin to this quality of universal love, agape. And that is the signature of what we're talking about.
Thank you. We'll turn next to Steve. Go ahead.
Hi, Leni and Richard. Thank you so much for presenting today. It's a bit of a principled whirlwind. It's what you did was to the untrained mind, quote unquote, all over the place. It was a brilliant exposition of the particulars of the idea you're trying to communicate. It's almost like looking at School of Athens and almost the temptation of being overwhelmed by each section, but taking a step back, you can really understand what you're doing. So I'm trying not to be overwhelmed by my own question here. But one thing that did come to mind was, especially since looking a little bit into the suggested reading that you had placed before us of Lin's paper on the principles of classical art, and he discussed he walked us through the crisis that what led to the crisis that Richard started with. That you started with, Richard, which was the Hunger Games, the Squid Games, the Euphoria, this utter chaos, which is a crisis, which is difficult to miss. But Lynn said that this started in the mid to late 60s, and so maybe I was hoping that you could help us see how the kernel of corruption might have started with that, because too often our quote unquote our parents say, "Oh, look at these obviously ugly things going on today," and say, "Oh, you kids are out of control or something." But really, we got to see what happened, what started this mess in the 60s, and really. I think that might help us isolate this this quality that you're having us consider, this classical quality, really what Schiller's critique of the evil in Kant, which might have been subtle for many people, but made clear by Schiller and Leni. So maybe you can say something about that. Thank you.
Well, I mean, remember that the world picture, to use Einstein's term, the world picture presented in the Hunger Games is a lie. People these days like to say, well, the establishment is lying to you. They're lying to you about COVID. They're lying to you about Russia. They're lying. Well, Hunger Games is a lie because they present to you the universe with no way out, nothing but despair, nothing but suicide, nothing but hell. And that's the picture. And if you're young and in turmoil, and if one is young, then you're in turmoil, that's the nature of being young, this is the complete picture of the universe which you are enticed into. So, as I said, Lynn said, in the modern period, go back to Kant 200 years ago, this is Nazi-like. When you put forward a universe without love, without agape, without development, without creativity, this is a bald-faced lie. That's not the universe. It doesn't exist. So in a sense, young people become hypnotized by this lie. And the answer is, as Bill Warfield explained, is for each of us to begin to immerse ourselves in beauty, in the various ways that Leni was just talking about. So I myself would not identify it in the 60s, but Lynn identifies it in the 1760s, 70s, and 80s, exactly at a moment when there was a renaissance going on in the language of music and a renaissance going on in the area of political freedom. That is the American Revolution. And in my political work for the Schiller Institute, I have the privilege of talking to diplomats from all over the world, and numbers of them from many corners of the globe, when the topic comes up, talks about how mankind as a whole was advanced by Ben Franklin, Washington, Hamilton, this network of geniuses. So if a picture is presented, as in modern culture today, of a universe without love, this is a big lie. It's to be rejected, and one has to begin to immerse oneself on the access to that. And as Bill said, get the ugliness out of yourself.
I think a really important point is what Schiller says, that the only way we can get a change in the political affairs of man is through an ennoblement of the character of the individual. And when I read that many years ago, I thought, oh my goodness, how is this going to happen? You look around and you say, we can only have change if we have an ennoblement of the individual, of every single individual character. How are we going to do that? But if you have during a paradigm shift that Lynn and Helga has called for again and again, that we are just in the infancy of humanity, when you have a shift occurring, and when the shift occurs, there would be also a earthquake shake of necessity for aesthetic education. And it can happen very, very fast. We have, with anybody who comes in touch with us, in order to be able to fight and live a happy life where you are good, you are happy with what you are doing, and also you become strong as two persons, as Warfield said, you have to, like what Schiller said in the 9th letter, live with your century, but don't be a creation of it. And that's what everyone who's on this call and us, everybody has to, okay, it's ugly out there, but in order to do what we must and we can do and what is good to do, we have to be working ourselves to be Renaissance people.
And one example that's current, which we've written, Leni and I have both written about a good deal, and others, is that today in China, they have been carrying out an economic miracle based upon the idea that economics is rooted in scientific change, that they will be successful economically in society as a whole if they put a priority on what they call innovation. But at the same time, at least as national policy, they have been carrying out for the last number of years a Confucian Renaissance. So there's an efflorescence in this nation of 1.4 billion people of studying the Song Dynasty, the Tang Dynasty, the works of Confucius. Bookstores, physical bookstores, pop up all over the nation. They have a financial backup so that people begin reading real physical books, and they can write in the margins and write what they think, and then have the book and look at it later and see how their thoughts change. Concert halls spring up everywhere. The concert hall are classical Western music, and they're filled with young people with their young children. Now, if you go to the Lincoln Center, it's a little bit like a senior citizens center. Everybody has either no hair or white hair. So there's an experiment going on in China where they're fostering both, attempting to figure out how to foster innovation in scientific thinking, with the idea that they have to carry out at the same time a cultural renaissance. And as Leni had pointed out to me, if you're going to carry out a Confucian renaissance, a renaissance based on the primacy of love as a social principle and practice, this is not something that happens in 6 months. This is a long-term project to move society forward. And there are immediate changes, but the important changes are over an extended period of time.
Really good you took this up, because what I had in 2010, 2012, 2014, and before, but in particular there, I gave some classes at universities in China. And every time the students and some of the teachers would complain about the education system. And I was very excited about all these things I saw, the development and this fast speed trains and so forth in China. And I said to them, don't worry, it's going to change, because the direction China has now, it must change. The education system, the education, and it's changing. I said to them, it might not be in your time, but in your children's time, it has to change. So if we talk about paradigm shift, it has taken place in China big time too, giving an idea for the world at large, what can be done, and within a very short period of time.
Great, thank you. You just brought to my mind just how amazing the LaRouche organization, how we sing classical music at political rallies. It just came to my mind right now as a flash. So thank you so much. I appreciate everything.
Good. Any other questions for our, I'm going to take the prerogative of calling on Bill to go next.
Hello.
Hi, Bill. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Oh.
Yeah.
Sure.
I know I don't count in the. Oh, okay. My video's not showing, but I'm here.
We can hear you.
I was a couple of things. I don't have any specific places to look it up, but I understand that Einstein and Planck would get together when they were both in Berlin to play music together. So it's very specifically on that. I wanted to bring that up. Also, Richard, when you brought up the essay by LaRouche, Beethoven as a Physical Scientist, it reminded me of a few other very poetical, polemical, paradoxical titles that he's given us. I mean, the guy can create a title that teaches you what you need to know. History as science. Poetry is the science of reason. And my favorite from when I first got involved in the movement, why poetry must supersede mathematics and physics. Just the titles teach you a lot. But of course, you can.
Prometheus and Europe.
Excuse me?
Prometheus and Europe was a good one too.
Yeah, I think all of this is available online. Anybody wants to look into it. But
well, I have a question for you, Bill. You spent many years, perhaps unhappy years, at Princeton University, one of the prestige science centers, where in fact Einstein spent a number of years at the Institute of Advanced Studies. This question of hypothesis and real science, as we discussed it tonight, is this taught in any universities today?
Well, I didn't see it where I was. I was studying mostly physics and math, and there was a lot.
That's where it would be.
Yeah, and a lot of LaRouche's writings. Obviously, we had Fusion magazine at the time, and I looked into Riemann, Cantor, and I found it all fascinating. But the I'd say the first LaRouche literature that I read that got me completely excited and probably was decisive was by Helga. It was called The Secret Knowledge of Friedrich Schiller.
Mm. Thanks, Bill.
It shouldn't be secret anymore. We should just say that.
He used to be very known in America.
Oh, that's true.
So with statues all over in the cities, if you look for them at the parks.
Yeah, the cover of that magazine had the people dressed as hippies hanging out
Yes.
under the statue of Schiller at Central Park.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, I mean, that's an important point that many people never are told today, which is that the method of Schiller and his friend and essentially follower Humboldt and that circle in Europe affected a revolution in pedagogy, in the teaching of the young. And because there was a huge German population in young America in the first decades of the 1800s, by Lincoln's time, there was a national movement based upon Schiller and Humboldt's ideas, which were dominant in the second half of the 19th century in the United States, which was part of the scientific and industrial efflorescence that occurred in the United States. I remember visiting, I guess in Fort Myers, Florida, a number of years back, the summer home of Edison and Firestone and Ford. And they had an exhibit of the National Science Essay Writing Contests around 1900, which Edison sponsored. So in high schools all over America, those students that wanted to enter entered a science contest. Well, they hadn't yet invented multiple choice tests. So difficult science questions were given out, and you were given a blue book, and you had to write an essay about each of the science questions. And the winners in every part of the country would be brought to New York, and there'd be 1,000 students, young people, in an auditorium, and they'd all be given blue books, and they would be given a half dozen theoretical questions on science, and they would have to write essays about each of those questions. No multiple choice, no looking up the answer at the back of the book. So that implies that there had to have been hundreds of judges reading all these papers, and then the winners won. But it was a completely different approach to education, which even existed in the United States from the standpoint of mastering fundamental principles. And of course, this was the generation also of Einstein in Europe. That world is so different from today, it's hard to imagine. It's like describing a different universe.
And that is why the development of the individual creativity is so important, because that is what creates the future. It's the citizens that creates the future society.
Jason, if you have any comments, jump in.
Well, actually, I have there was one more question coming in from Mike Campbell, so I wanted him to go ahead and put out what he's got there, and then we're coming up on time, so we'll get your responses as a form of wrapping up. And if I want to jump in, I will.
Good.
Go ahead, Mike.
Hello. Yeah, sure. Can I be heard?
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Leni and Richard. Your old fisherman, Leni. I've never had I don't know how blessed am I, but I don't think I've ever had real depth in what it means to be lonely before looking at that today. And in the mountainscape there, I kind of got a savory enjoyment in time feeling, and I really feel connected to what the artist thought in doing that, and it's something that I could use in the real world, and that kind of brings me to the point of I don't know if you'd call it subjective truth or just hypothesis that is the spearhead of what we're doing, and of the individual that's gonna, you know, lead the way here. That thought terrifies me. It's good for everybody else. It's good for Einstein. It's good for you guys, but it terrifies me when thinking about that in my own life or putting that to use in my own life. Because I mean, Leni, you know me pretty well. I don't trust myself much, and you know, I'm kind of Kantian. I'll swallow my emotions and I'll act on duty. But I just, you know, I just wanted to show my appreciation and just, you know, see if you wanted to do something with that.
Well, I disagree with your evaluation of yourself. When I had heard your voice and I couldn't really see you because you had this hat on all the time, I thought you were probably 20 years old because you had such a fresh, young mind that a person that is his 30s normally has lost and and you have it. You have a very good insight. You took pictures of some paintings that you had seen at exhibitions. You have been on Rembrandt, and I thought you had picked some really good ones. That means that your inner judgment of agape and what is beautiful, real beautiful, you already have inherent in yourself to judge. So, I mean, we only have one life. So I think we should take that life in really big bites and make that life as fruitful and happy in the real way, happy as we possible can. So that, as LaRouche always said, you have to think about what is the purpose of your life? Why are you here? And then make your life the best possible you can for the sake of the future. And because otherwise, why are you living? So that's what I would say.
I think Einstein gives you some encouragement, Mike, in that he says something which, when I first read it, I found curious. And he said that this quality of Einfühlung, of insight, intuition, is developed with experience. And I thought, well, do you get that from experience? You just do it over and over again. But as you live and as you practice the battle for accessing this quality of an agape, you get insights by its very nature of how to access it. So the more you do it, the better you get at it. That's a guarantee.
Every time I read Schiller, I learn something new, although I have studied him for many years. And you will find 20 years from now, when you read an article by LaRouche that you thought you understood everything, that you realize, oh, there was a bunch of things I didn't get, I didn't understand. So life is good. Not boring at all.
Well, really want to thank you both. This has been an extremely provocative and enriching discussion. I'll read one comment that came in here on the chat from Philip. Resounding bravi to Richard and Leni for the composition and delivery of this dialogue with the unity of science and its mother. So thank you both very much. Is there anything else that you'd like to say to finish off here, or have you?
Fine.
Yeah, okay.
Join the Schiller reading. Young people, join the Schiller reading next Tuesday. We start on the aesthetic education.
Great. Good. And if you're not sure how to start on that, get in touch with us by whatever means you have of getting in touch with us, or you can send questions at laroucheorganization.com, and we'll pass that on to Leni. So that'll do it for this week. Next, the next class next Wednesday is going to be on the implementation of the good through the American Revolution. What's the real history of the creation of the United States, and what was its intent, and how do we bring it to that again? So thanks again to Richard and Leni and everyone who participated, and see everybody next week. Take care.
Okay.